Yeah, as a founder, you have signed up for tough decisions and it's your role. I think what the parameter that you have to use is that, is it for the greater good of the company, right? Because as you're running the company, you're responsible for not one person or two person, you're responsible for like hundreds or today thousands of employees that run the company. You have responsibility to the clients, you have responsibility to the investors, and you have to find the right balance and generally take a long-term view. So a lot of things might look like quick shortcut that I can do this and it'll give up a quick gain. The parameter has to be what is in the long-term benefit of the company. And as long as that is the parameter used, decisions are not that hard to take. I think on culture piece, and as somebody's rightly said, culture is not what you do, but what you actually discourage from doing, right? So it's not just about setting the right culture or sending the right culture directions. You also have to call out when somebody goes off from it. And you have to take hard calls to ensure that people stick by that culture.
Welcome to Prime Venture Partners Podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs looking to build and grow their startups. Learn about uncommon strategies and common traps from makers and doers of startup ecosystem.
Hi, everybody. This is Sanjay Swamy welcoming you to another episode of the Prime Venture Partners Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today and a special timing, in fact. Harshil Mathur, the co-founder and CEO of one of India's fintech darlings, Razorpay, and the latest entrant to the Unicorn Club from India. Harshil, welcome, congratulations, and welcome to our show.
Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks for inviting. Look forward to the conversation.
Terrific. Yeah, it's a great moment, and we'll, although it's of course a milestone in the journey of a startup, and we'll talk about that. What I thought, given that it's the middle of IPL season, we will kind of use a couple of cricket analogies and think through your journey at Razorpay. You and Shashank, of course, remember from the early days when you all started the company, and talk through that journey from the early days all the way to where you are today and the path ahead. So maybe we can break it up into three phases, the power play phase, the early days where, things were still getting defined and set up, and then sort of the middle overs phase where you went from being a player in the space to being today the undisputed leader in the segment. And then now, the slug overs or the consolidated, the later stage, I would say, relatively speaking, where you're now the incumbent and, the market leader, and how you see the evolution of the space. So let's start with the early days, the power play phase, where you guys were getting started. How did you identify the opportunity, and, what did you know, and how did you get going?
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. I think the journey started about 5.5 years back. Me and Shashank knew each other from college days, and we used to work together on projects, a lot of side projects during college times. So when we graduated, Shashank joined Microsoft in US, I joined Schlumberger in Middle East. And while we were doing our jobs, we had a lot of free time at the end of the day. So we used to do side projects at that time as well, just try to build cool things for the community, try to get adoption. And for one of those things, we were building like a social crowdfunding platform. And for that, we had to accept payments in India. So when we tried to do that and reached out to all the large incumbents at that point of time, we realized that it was extremely hard for a startup to accept payments. This is early 2014, mid 2014, when startups are not as big or as mainstream as they are today. So most companies were focused on large enterprises because that's where the business really was. And we felt odd about it because we thought that, hey, startups are just coming up in the country, and payments is a bottom layer stack, right? Every startup would need payments in some shape and form. So if somebody like us were to build that, I think the kind of growth we could see as some of these startups grow up to become big would be really high. And I think that was the original thesis because of which we came up with the idea to start Razorpay. Of course, it's not easy because payments is a regulated domain. It's not something you can just build in our garages and launch out. We had to get bank approvals, partnerships, all of those things. So there was a long slog after that, but I think that's where the original idea of building something like this came out for us.
Right. One of the things you all also did was, take an API and a developer-first centric approach, which although Stripe had started that, it was still early days in their journey as well. What gave you the conviction that was the right way to approach this market?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we had on day one is that we built very much from customer first angle, right? So if startups are supposed to use us and we are a startup ourselves, how would we expect a payment gateway or a payment platform to look like? I think that was the thesis. And I think you give this example, right? Most payment players in India at that point of time all looked similar in terms of integration. right? Razorpay was a standout. And in fact, a lot of people called out that why is your integration so different? There's an interesting reason why our integration was different. And like the way most payment platforms are built is that they take APIs from banks, they take integration from banks, and they build their integration layer on top of it. So most integration kits look very similar because they are built on top of the same bank. In our case, fortunately or unfortunately, we didn't have the bank integration on day one. We still had to source it. So while we are sourcing and getting the integration kits from the banks, we started building the product first. So we said that, okay, let's assume that a merchant wants to integrate and let's assume the bank side is a black box. How do we expect a merchant to integrate? So we built the merchant side integration layer first, and that's why our APIs are built the way they are because they were built from merchant first angle. And then when we got the bank integration kit, we realized, okay, that they look very different. So we built the scaffolding on our side to connect those things together. So whether it is by intention or by chance, we built the product with a merchant first or customer first approach simply because we didn't have the inside out view.
Wonderful. So definitely, focus on the customer and thinking customer first, is of course something that that everybody preaches. In your case, it ended up being sort of a very important part of the journey, and it's very clear to you, your customer is the merchant and the business. What were some of the things that you, in hindsight, were some mistakes that you all made in the beginning, and specifically, how do startups, or our audience, look out for, making some rookie mistakes and take corrective action quickly in the early days?
I think there are a lot of mistakes that founders make early on. I think from our perspective, there are a lot of them. But fortunately for us, getting into YC helped us reduce a lot of those because they were able to advise us early. Some of the standard mistakes that we made was we started hiring sales folks a little early than we should have. That distanced us. But again, YC brought us back into that. One of the interesting examples I remember in the early days was we got funded. We got a Series A term sheet from Tiger, and through that we got connected to some of the largest players in the Indian startup ecosystem. Right, so we got connected to Flipkart, Ola, and so on and so forth. And this was a time when we had less than 1,000 merchants on our platform. So we started having a chat with these guys and we felt that, okay, maybe we can close them. And as an early B2B startup, especially in the enterprise space, you generally have a greed that, okay, hey, if I get one Flipkart or one Ola, then my year is done because I'll get more volumes from them than I'll get from 1,000 startups or 10,000 startups for that matter. So let's just go and close them. So I was spending a lot of time into that. Once I got into spend meetings and meetings and meetings for the next 2 to 3 months, figuring out how to close one of these large enterprise clients. And at that point, I think I talked to one of our mentors and he gave me an analogy that, hey, you're trying to chase after, like it's a hunting analogy, that you're trying to chase after elephants, but you're not ready to handle an elephant right now. You should go after the rabbits and deers at this moment. And I think that was a very important advice because looking back, if we had gone ahead and closed one of those deals, I think Razorpay would not be where we are today because for a short time, it would have given a sudden jump to our revenues, our volumes, and everything. But what would have happened is that serving a large client is a mammoth task. And at that small scale, when we were like 20 employees, kind of requirements they would have, the kind of feature requests they would have, we would just be building for them for a year. So the kind of features that we built that got us that organic traction that allowed us to scale up over time would not have happened, and we would end up being a business that serves 2 or 3 large businesses. That's it. And I think today we realize the importance of being able to scale, and the scalable growth that we have been able to achieve has happened because we spent the first years of our journey building for startups and early stage companies. But I think at that point of time, we couldn't see that. It took us some time to realize it, but fortunately, we realized it before we made the commitment.
That's awesome. So a combination of being very customer focused and staying focused on the larger opportunity rather than trying to get some quick early wins that may have translated to some short-term bump, but longer term things. So a lot of this comes back to the founders also having some clear thinking as to where they wanted to be in the long run. And as you all evolved into the middle over phase where you started seeing some early success, when did you have this clarity of thought that you wanted to be a sort of a mass market player and clearly over a period of time go up market as well?
When you start a company, I think you don't really have a very deep, long vision, right? You start with, okay, this is a problem that I want to solve. And for us, it was very simple that you want to help startups accept payments. As we started building towards it and as we started talking to more customers, we realized that how deep the problem was. And I think it was around while we were in YC and we met folks like Paul Graham. I think that's when we actually crystallized that, okay, how broad we want to really go. And the problem is pretty broad than what we were thinking of earlier. But I think it's an evolutionary journey. I would not say that our vision is truly complete even today. Right? Like the vision evolves. So initially we were just focused on payments, and then we went through a couple of years and we realized, okay, payment is just one part of the problem. We need to go deeper. So we said that, okay, We want to cover all aspects of money flow. And then last year we got further deeper and then said we also want to do neo banking and lending, because until we digitize the entire business finance ecosystem, true digitization of business is not complete. Our long-term goal is pretty simple, that we want to digitize businesses, but the ways and means to make it happen have changed through the years. So it was payments only first, it became payments and paid disbursements later, and today it's payments, banking, and lending put together. So the means and opportunities might change, but the goal is to help Indian businesses go digital.
Right. So let's talk a little bit also, about team building and certainly the kind of key management team or senior leadership hires that you bring in during the very early days and then towards the middle phase as well. What were some of the key things you all focused on, to build out the org from, clearly, two founders and a small number of developers initially to what is now several hundred people and, much more organized, like a structured entity, and how should I say, a more formal organization? And how do you keep the innovation spirit as you go through these phases and scale up?
Yeah, actually, team building is one of the hardest and most important problems every founder has to go through. And it is one of those things that can really make or break the company, because you can do a mistake in business strategy, you can change, you can go in a different direction and then pivot to a different direction, and all of those things are actual. But if you don't build the team right from day one, it's hard to fix this once it's out of your hand. So I think a couple of things that we did well was that first is the early hires are really important, and that really sets up the tone of how your team will look like in the future, right? The way we got our early hires is that first is the first 8-10 people were mostly our friends and colleagues from college that we knew well, that who we have worked with. We knew the kind of ideals that they have, the kind of trust that they have in us, and I think getting them on board early on. And a lot of them still continue to be at Razorpay, which has kept like a thing, which all of those have been like anchors at Razorpay for the culture that we want to build, because they have seen the journey right from day one. And they carry those ideas, they carry the vision that Razorpay has. I think in the early days, more than skill set, what is really important to look for is the culture and the vision and the beliefs that of the early team members, right? So we didn't hire for a skill set in the early days or experience, but they were all mostly journalists, people who could switch from one thing to other very quickly. To put it simply, like you need jack of all trades, you don't need masters in the early days. So our first 10 to 12 hires were all jack of all trades, people who could pick up whatever came their way. And in the early days, because you anyways don't have very clearly defined functions, it is really important to get hire people who have a very first principles approach, that they want to solve the problem and they are willing to find solutions, but they would not say, hey, I'm a sales guy or I'm an ops guy or I'm a tech guy or things like that. Like, you need people who would go beyond boundaries of functions and try to make things happen. I think that was one of the most important things that set up the tone for Razorpay, that our early team was fairly strong and was from a fairly diverse skill set. But as I said earlier, like the focus was not on skill set anyway. The second thing is that I think our hiring process, we crafted a very closely monitored hiring process on day one. So even on day one, we had like 7 to 8 rounds for any person who joined Razorpay, and the hiring bar was set pretty high. It continues even today, and like the hiring process has definitely evolved as we scaled up, but it continues to be fairly strong. Kind of things that we're looking for. We know the kind of people who are, and in fact today we know it better, the kind of people who become successful at Razorpay, and we very strongly keep our hiring bar to ensure that only those people get in. Because a lot of times startups take the shortcut approach that, okay, let's just hire fast, and in worst case you can fire the person. In my experience in particular, the kind of damage, especially in early days, that can happen because of a wrong hire is extremely higher than any short-term wins that the person can bring in. So hiring somebody just because they can help you close one deal, or they can help you close one particular transition or things like that, is definitely a recipe for disaster, because the impact every hire has, especially when you're like 50 member, 100 member, is extremely deep on the culture of the organization. So it's really important to ensure that you're hiring for long term, and you also keep a constant check on whatever you thought when you were hiring a person, has it stayed true. So first 2-3 months of every hire are really important, and I keep that check even today in senior executives that we hire. The first 2-3 months, I really work very closely with them to ensure that they get enough time to blend into the culture and ensure that they understand Razorpay's culture before they start making any big decisions. So yeah, I mean, hiring the right folks and ensuring that the culture is set in the right form is one of the most important jobs of any entrepreneur.
So Harshil, you talked about, culture and hiring and keeping the bar really, really high there and being very careful. And yet at the same time, every now and then there will be some mistakes made in hiring for whatever reason, right? Some things don't work out, some business opportunities change, etc. How important and how difficult is it for founders to make tough decisions and make them fast, especially for senior leadership roles?
Yeah, as a founder, you have to stand up for tough decisions, and it's your role. I think what the barometer that you have to use is that is it for the greater good of the company, right? Because as you're running the company, you're responsible for not one person or two person, you're responsible for like hundreds or today thousands of employees that are in the company. You have responsibility to the clients, you have responsibility to the investors, and you have to find the right balance. And yeah, generally take a long term view. So a lot of things might look like quick shortcut that I can do this and it'll give up a quick gain. I think what the parameter has to be what is in the long term benefit of the company. And as long as that is the parameter used, decisions are not that hard to take. I think on culture piece, and as somebody's rightly said, culture is not what you do, but what you actually discourage from doing, right? So it's not just about setting the right culture or setting the right culture directions. You also have to call out when somebody goes off from it. And you have to take hard calls to ensure that people stick by that culture. Otherwise, culture dilution is very easy and fairly common as the company scales, especially an organization like Razorpay, which has constantly scaled rapidly. Unless you keep calling out when divergences happen, it's very easy for the culture to get diluted, right? So those hard decisions are equally, if not more important in setting the right culture than doing things like announcing what your vision is or announcing what your culture is. It's equally important to take the calls when somebody goes against that.
Right. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit more about the middle overs phase, right? Where you had a good start, as you said, you focused with the startups, and you had some good adoption with them. Started getting invited to some of the larger companies, and over a period of time, Razorpay has now, as I think you yourself had tweeted and seen a few other tweets. Today when you search Razorpay, you see more hits than when you search for payment gateway in India, right? So, but that has been a very important phase, obviously, from the company going from a new player, new kid on the block, which just focused on small companies, to suddenly now becoming the primary payment gateway for some very large players as well, right? And probably all the large players here in India. So how did the company make that transition, and both from a product, from a sales experience with these larger clients, how did you have to build the team, and then what were some of the investments in support and things like that helped you make that transition and keep both segments of the customers happy?
Yeah, I mean, overtaking the payment gateway term as a leader in the search volume was an important milestone from basically from simple perspective, right? In consumer companies, it's fairly common. You'll have more searches for OnePlus or iPhone than you'd have for mobile phones. The reason it is important in payment gateway space is that from the first day that we launched, I think there was a general perception that this is a very commoditized space, like that people care about getting a payment gateway, they don't care who is the payment gateway. And it was true. At that point of time, the space was commoditized. Everyone offered almost similar features at similar pricing, and people didn't care which service you use as long as you found one service that worked with you. I think just Razorpay as a search term overtaking payment gateway is important that we were able, that this just proves that we were able to establish a brand, which means that we were able to prove that payment gateways, payment acceptance is not a commoditized space. Because if you can build a brand in the space, then definitely people are looking for something more than just utility. And what that something more was for Razorpay could be different for anyone else. But for us, what that something more from day one was that when people said that it is a commoditized space, for us, we thought that we could build a brand in the space because we realized that product and tech differentiation could be that something more because of which people will seek out one player over the other. And with that thesis, we went in and we from day one, we have focused on building a lot of product and tech innovation that was non-existent in the Indian market, right? So we were one of the first ones to have the kind of APIs that we have. We had a checkout form that today supports more than 100 instruments. I don't think anywhere in the world you have any player has built a single checkout form that supports more than 100 instruments right on the merchant site. Similarly, when new instruments came in, we were the first payment gateway to launch support for UPI on day one. And we remember Mr. Nandan also tweeted about it because it took us at least 4 to 5 months for any other player to match it up. And a lot of customers came to us because we were the only one supporting UPI at that one time. Similarly, when we saw that refunds is a big problem, we launched instant refunds for merchants. And again, today we are still one of the only players that provides instant refunds as a standardized offering to reduce the pain. So this constant innovation of launching new products and new features and new services before everyone else in the market was a really important feat. And that is something that built a very strong brand for us. Today, Razorpay is known to be one of the most innovative companies in the fintech space. And the reason we are known that as such is because we constantly launched more features, more products than anyone else in the market. Last year in our fintech conference, we launched more than 7 products. We launched something like things like neo banking, things like corporate cards. Again, no payment gateway. None of the payment gateways do any of these, and we could always have taken the call that we'll stick to what we do and we'll just keep doing it. But one thing we realized is that like if payments is just one part of the problem, our larger problem that we're trying to solve is distraction of businesses. And unless we go all the way in to help solve that, we are a very small layer of that journey. And I think that focus on ensuring that we keep building products and services and tech to ensure that we help businesses solve more and more problems every day. I think that helped us build a very strong brand in that space and continues to hold true for us today. I think all of those things went in together to make that happen, and I think it is all credits to the team that made that happen.
Right. Tell us a little bit more about the large customers, Harshil, right? Because startups kind of struggle with saying, look, I'm either going after the small, long tail of customers, or I'm going after the enterprise grade customers. But, very few succeed at doing both well, right? And you guys are now doing both, quite successfully. What does it mean internally for the company? Is it like running two organizations, or is it really something that can be done smoothly and seamlessly?
Yeah, it is kind of like learning two organizations, right? So SME and enterprise customers behave very differently. And from day one, we realized that, okay, like these are two different buckets. Initially, our focus was just on SMEs. And the way we scaled up in that journey is that we started with very early stage companies. Some of these grew up to become, let's say, Series A companies. So now we targeted all Series A plus Series A companies. Then some of them scale up to become Series B, Series C companies, mid stage. We started targeting all mid stage companies. So the evolution happens as our customers evolved, we evolved with them to cover larger and larger players of the market. I think we had just two basic ideas when we started that we want to be the de facto choice of startups in the country, and B, we don't want to lose any customers as they grow and become bigger. And just focusing on these two things helped ensure a very strong journey for us. And over time, some of these companies became enterprises. So we had to add enterprise features to ensure that we don't lose these customers. And as we added those enterprise features, we could now target other enterprise companies in their spirit. So I'll give an example, right? Like we onboard companies, for example, we onboarded Nestaway when they were fairly young. They were like Series A plus company. We onboarded them. They grew up to become Series B, Series C companies. And as they grew big, we had to keep adding features to ensure that we don't lose them. And we added more features and services. We realized that, okay, now we could serve all companies within their bracket. We went after all other companies in similar brackets with them, and that expanded our market size that we were able to reach out to. Today, if you look at it, organically it has evolved, but today our enterprise buckets runs independently and then the SME bucket runs independently. Kind of features that an SME looks for, the kind of services that an SME looks for is significantly different than what an enterprise looks for. An SME, things like onboarding time, easy onboarding, quick sign up, quick go live, all of these things are significantly more important than anything else. They need things like no code integrations like payment links and payment pages are really important for them. Versus when you go to enterprise, things like success rate, having the best metric, scalability, performance, availability, all of those things are more important. So those things behave very differently, and the kind of support required, the kind of experience required are all significantly different. But we didn't take that call on day one. Like it happened organically, automatically as we kept onboarding customers. Internally, the organization diverged because the kind of things that we had to do for enterprises was significantly different than the kind of things that you would do for SMEs. And to strike that balance, you have to take a call on what is more important and what is more important different at different stages of the company. But for us, one thing stayed true: we are building for masses. So SMEs take the first priority in our commission, and it's a harder call to make because a single enterprise gives you a lot more volumes, a lot more revenue, and again goes back to the same story that I told earlier. And while that is important, you don't want to build a company. At least we didn't want to build a company to serve 10 or 100 enterprise clients. We wanted to build a company to serve million SME clients. And that is the core direction that Razorpay wants to take.
Wonderful. So now let's look ahead, Harshil, right? You all have come from scratch, being a player in the space, to becoming the leader, to becoming the category leader for sure. And also now, really defining, as you said, search volume for hire, you defined Razorpay as a brand. Now you're going to carry the responsibility of being the leader, and there are a lot of things around that, around data security, privacy, etc. It becomes a lot more important. Over the last few years, for sure, right? And then there is also the part of startups looking at Razorpay and looking at maybe I can do this part better and sort of unbundle things as we start seeing these phenomena happen. How does one defend against that? How does one encourage that in some ways? How does that push you? What do you look forward to over the next few years as you all are going ahead? And how do you stay ahead of the game by being the incumbent?
Yeah, I don't think from any incumbent sounds a very scary term when you use it for us, but I can understand where it comes from. I think incumbent or startup is more about mindset than the stage the company is in. I think from our perspective, and this is my message even when we announced that we have become a unicorn, is that like our journey is very, very early right now. We are as like in the larger scheme of things, we are much closer to start of the journey than we are close to the final stage that we want to be. There's a long journey ahead of us, and from a mindset perspective, I don't think we have the incumbent mindset. We don't believe that we are impenetrable. I think the reason Razorpay has been that successful and the reason we have been able to constantly get business interaction is because we have stayed ahead of the curve. We have constantly innovated, constantly built new products. We've constantly done things better and faster than anyone else in the market. And the only way we'll maintain that position is by constantly keep doing that. The day we stop doing that and we feel that, okay, hey, we have established ourselves, we will be the largest player in the space no matter what happens, and that's the day we'll start our downfall. So it's really important for us to realize that, I mean, just from our overall context, right? Like today, the digital economy is like less than 3% of India's GDP, right? So if you talk about us being bigger than a competition, probably. But if you look at from the overall Indian ecosystem perspective, the digitization journey is hardly complete. Our biggest competition is still the traditional ways of doing business, the traditional ways of accepting payments, the traditional way of doing banking. And that is the biggest competition. And if you look at from that perspective, we are still a very young startup trying to fight this large behemoth of traditional banking, traditional finance. And I think from that perspective, there's a long way ahead of us. We have to keep innovating. We have to keep building new products to ensure that we can keep competing with the traditional world of finance, and we can increase India's digital economy significantly more from the 3% mark where it is today. And until that happens, I don't think we have achieved enough to call ourselves an incumbent.
Well said. Well said. Absolutely. So, having said that, one last thing I wanted to discuss briefly with you, as you know, payments industry has evolved quite a bit, right? You also talked about UPI and things like that. A lot of things in India, however, also involve, as the country is evolving. You know, there are a lot of regulations that keep changing. You know, we recently had topics like zero MDR. UPI has come and changed the business model quite dramatically. How does a company like Razorpay, which clearly some of these things may or may not have impacted your business directly, but how does one see opportunity when some of the like when the rug is being pulled out from under you, and how does one adapt?
Yeah, I think the basic problem goes down to that how much value add are you giving to customers, right? So, for example, when UPI made zero MDR, right, our first question was that what are we providing to our customers and are they aware of what they are paying to us, right? So, it's not about the MDR. Let's keep the MDR aside. Let's say we earn 20 basis points per transaction out top on top of that MDR. Our customers are very strongly aware because we are working with internet customers. They're very smart. They're actually aware that they are paying 20 basis points to Razorpay for the services they provide. If they go to a bank or if they go to a traditional finance, they can save this 20 points. So they're paying those 20 points, basis points because they know the value that Razorpay brings in and they know that it's worth 20 points, 20 basis points. As long as that is clear, then you can always find ways to structure that in some other way or form, right? So if MDR becomes zero, you can charge a platform fee, you can charge an annual maintenance cost, you could provide additional value add services on top of which you charge. As long as it is clear that you are providing a service and which is worth X amount of money, and the business agrees that it is worth X amount of money and I'm willing to pay it, structuring it in a particular way or ensuring that you follow the regulation, but as long as the business is willing to pay it, you'll be able to provide additional services on top that they'll be willing to pay for. For example, today we provide payment links, payment pages, and all of these platforms that businesses use, and they know that that is worth more than just payment processing. So if they go to a traditional processor and they just do payment processing, they might be able to do it for free, but they'll have to spend a lot of time in building these things. Versus when they go with Razorpay, they get all of these ready. They're willing to pay a price for that. So as long as that relationship is very clear and transparent, and in B2B space, especially in the kind of space where we operate, where our customers are extremely smart and aware on what they're doing, it is not very hard to build that out. I think the threat of these changes happens when your business model is built around opacity. When your business model is built around the fact that you earn money because regulation allows you to, or you earn money because of the regulatory imbalance, I think those business models will keep getting threatened by changes in regulatory ecosystem. Fortunately for us, our model and our structure is very clearly built around providing additional service to the customer for which he's willing to pay for. And as long as building around that, these things hardly change the game. You might have to go through some short-term pain, find alternate ways to charge, build other products to charge. But as long as the business is aware of what he's paying for, it's not very hard to handle all of these changes.
Actually, that's a very important point, Harshil, and I've seen this time and time again, where companies, people say, the Indian customer is very cost conscious, and I've always maintained that's not true. It's really that they're very value conscious, right? And if they see the value, they will just make a judgment: is this fair value or not? And then they're actually very quick and happy to pay if the value is real, right? And I think that's something that's kind of what you implied as well when you said, make sure there is clear value and you're transparent with the customer as to how much you are monetizing that value. Harshil, it's been terrific chatting with you. We can keep going on and certainly dive into the payment space. One closing question, which is sort of also a question for younger entrepreneurs. What would you be telling yourself if you could rewind the clock to 2014 when you were starting out?
Except for not getting into payments, because it's a pretty tough space. I think one of the things, there are a lot of times in Razorpay journey where we questioned and me and Shashank just sat with each other and had a discussion on, is it worth going in? Because there were times when things were really tough. I remember in the earliest days when we were not getting a banking approval to in one of the mid-stage days, and business was not scaling as we had hoped it to. There were times when you had this thought that, hey, should we pull the plug and should we think about something else? I think, and I'll tell you, startups is that entrepreneurship is a journey of perseverance, right? There'll be tough times, there'll be hard times, and it's a pretty long journey. I think you have to be really clear on what your vision is, what you're solving for. And the thing that got through us in those times is that we were talking to our customers and our customers were saying, hey, Razorpay solves a problem for me that nobody else does. And as long as you keep hearing that, when your customer keeps telling you that, yes, you solve a problem for me, and the only person who needs to care if Razorpay didn't exist tomorrow is your customer. As long as your customer is saying that, yes, I care that you exist in the market and I would be affected significantly if you're not there in the market, as long as you have those things, then everything else can be sorted for. So growth will come, funding will come, hiring will happen, all of those things will happen as long as you have a problem that you're solving for the customer. And that is the only thing that you need to seek out for to build a startup.
Very well said. Harshil, thank you so much for taking the time, and I look forward to tracking and cheering for the success of Razorpay over the years. It's been great exchanging information and brainstorming with you from time to time, and all the best in the next phase of your journey.
Thanks, Sanjay. Very nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.